Greetings, Culture Warriors. It is I, Jeff Vieira, author of Culture is Everything, and your host for this latest dispatch from the front. Boy, the games people play sometimes. Today we've got a story that'll show you how dangerous it is when you let culture run amok. This is from the Associated Press. Games maker Ubisoft shakes up staff amid misconduct probe. French gaming giant Ubisoft is parting ways with its creative director and two other executives and promising zero tolerance for toxic staff behavior following an internal investigation of misconduct and media reports of sexual harassment and other workplace abuse. In a statement Sunday, Ubisoft CEO Yves Guillemot said the developer of Assassin's Creed and other games has fallen short in its obligation to guarantee a safe and inclusive workplace environment for its employees. This is unacceptable as toxic behaviors are in direct contrast to values on which I have never compromised and never will, Guillemot said. Ubisoft announced the immediate resignation of Serge Hascoët as the firm's powerful chief creative officer. Hascoët joined Ubisoft in 1987, the year after Guillemot founded the company with his four brothers. Ubisoft had previously described Hascoët as its creative leader, whose unique vision has infused every game released by the company. The director of Ubisoft's Canadian studios, Yannis Mallat, is also leaving immediately because recent allegations that have come to light in Canada against multiple employees make it impossible for him to continue in his position, the company said. Cécile Cornet is being replaced as Ubisoft's global head of human resources. Guillemot also promised further profound changes across the company to improve and strengthen our workplace culture. Investigations by French daily Liberation and other media reports have pointed to alleged sexual harassment targeting women employees and other workplace misconduct, and a growing willingness by some in the industry to speak up against abuses in the wake of the Me Too movement. The management shakeup at Ubisoft follows its announcement in June of an internal investigation and apology to everyone affected by this. We must do better, it said then. Okay, so let's dig a little deeper. What is going on at Ubisoft? Ubisoft's been around a long time, as I noted, in 1987. If you're a gamer, you've no doubt played their games. I myself have been a fan of the Assassin's Creed series, so I think I played everything in that particular series. But they're a pretty prominent maker of video games. And, of course, the key position within a video game company is really the chief creative officer. It's the person who gives the creative vision to the products that are launched by the company. They kind of are the glue that holds everything together. So many of these games, and Ubisoft games in particular are known for this, are welded together via a storyline. So the development of a game becomes much like the creation of, say, a television series. There's a story, they've got a lot of subplots, they've got a lot of different options to go down as you take different actions during the game. It's really a pretty complicated affair. Yet in then that you need to synchronize up the voice acting associated with the script for the game, the Foley sounds that represent the environment, the engine that you're using for the world building and the animation, and somehow all this stuff has to come together and be a coherent vision for the game to succeed. And so the chief creative officer is a very crucial role in doing that. So to lose your chief creative officer is a big deal. Obviously, to lose your head of human resources is a big deal. To lose your director of one of your major national studios is a big deal. Those are some big openings at the top of Ubisoft that have come down because one of the founders of Ubisoft, in Yves Guillemot, simply cannot tolerate the culture that these leaders have created. And who is responsible for the company's culture? Well, ultimately, it's the leadership of the company. And in this case, that leadership is the CEO of Ubisoft. So what we have here is Monsieur Guillemot taking the reins of the culture and rooting out some toxic subcultures that have arisen. And in his case, it's particularly difficult because some key members of his senior leadership team were part of that culture. And it looks like, if you read between the lines, the reason that they canned the human resources person is probably because they had a hand in covering up the abuses of the others, if not engaged in abuse directly themselves. So they are clearly trying to clean house. Now, it's a common value, and not just in the Me Too era, in the workplace to not tolerate sexual harassment of employees. It's an abuse of power. You're in a leadership position over someone. You're at different levels in the organization. And beginning a sexual relationship with a subordinate just exposes that imbalance of power and calls into question their ability to freely consent to such a relationship. It's also a tremendous distraction for the people involved, as well as if that relationship were to become public, it would undermine other employees' faith in the integrity of the decisions being made by that senior leader. Why? Because they would be suspected of showing favoritism to the person that they're sleeping with. It's a bad deal all around, and for this reason, many a company strongly discourages workplace relationships and insists that those relationships be disclosed to the company as a matter of course. So obviously, for some time, misbehavior has been tolerated. Now, it also must be considered that Ubisoft is a French company. And if there's anything that the French are known for, it's having a certain laissez-faire approach to romance. So it's possible that while the culture as communicated made clear that such things were intolerable, that the culture as lived was quite different, and it went with the larger grain of French culture. Certainly a possibility. In America, where we're viewed as being a little more puritanical about such things, that wouldn't be the case. It tends to be a little bit more black and white. But perhaps in France, it was different. But the good news is that the CEO of the company is making very clear what the cultural values are at Ubisoft and is taking strong action to ensure that those cultural values are lived, starting at the top. It's a textbook example of what to do when you need to reform a culture. Ubisoft is doing fine. They haven't had a major issue, really, in terms of the quality of the products that they're producing or how they're performing in the marketplace. So this is really down to, one or more values are not being lived the way they should be. And so the fact that they're willing to take such decisive action, even though you can argue, boy, you're losing some critical people there, you could have a negative impact on the products that are currently in the pipeline as a result. It speaks well of the CEO, Yves Guillemot. It speaks well of the culture that he's trying to put in place and ensure thrives at his company. So this is a good news story in a lot of ways. People will hype on the more sensational aspects of it, but here you have a company that is actually cleaning up a mess that has taken root in its culture. And I would imagine that aside from the usual hiccups that you'll have, is that once things settle down, new leadership is in place, and they're marching forward, that they'll see an improvement in how things are being done at Ubisoft. Now, you have to wonder, whenever you lose your creative head, do they poach some of the key creative minds that have been behind some of those key projects? It's possible, but if what they did was generally viewed as execrable, then maybe not. So we'll have to see how that develops. People are people. They tend to flock tribally together. If they believe that the people that have been fired were wronged somehow in their firing, that it was an unjust firing, that things were blown out of proportion perhaps, then maybe it will be different, and they'll be at risk of losing some more talent, not because they themselves engaged in such behaviors, but because they have a loyalty to the people who did and were removed. These things happen. It's never an easy time. That's why in the book, when I talk about your strategies for how to deal with culture and the gap between culture as lived and culture as communicated or desired, I talk about the fact that as you go from a strategy of conforming to the current culture, to reforming it, changing it in some significant way, to transforming it, changing it completely, you take on a tremendous amount of risk working up that slope. It's not for the faint of heart. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes commitment, and you have to take a lot of risk as you move up that ramp. So it shouldn't be done willy-nilly. It has to be considered. The deviations from the culture have to be such that they're painful. These are things that we really value, not just words on a wall, and we're willing to risk ultimately the destruction of the company in order to get the culture right. I think that's the case for Yves Guillemot and his family. I think that they view their honor as tied up with the culture of Ubisoft. And I hope that they navigate through these stormy seas and continue to produce great games in the process. So good luck to them, because let's face it, a prima donna here, a prima donna there is one thing, but culture is everything. Have a great day.